A woman sat across from me recently. She was smart, accomplished, the kind of person you look at and think she has it all figured out. And she said something to me that stopped me dead cold in my tracks. She said, "There are so many things I didn't do because getting married was the goal." And I just stood there for a second and thought about it because I knew exactly what she meant. Not because marriage is bad. I'm happily married right now. But because when marriage becomes the goal, it replaces something else. It replaces the question of who am I really? What do I actually want? What does my life look like when no one else is watching? And here's the thing, she wasn't angry about the marriage. She was heartbroken about the version of herself she never got to meet. Yeah, let that land for a second. So today we're going to talk about why so many smart, ambitious women feel lost right now. And not because they failed, but because they succeeded at a plan that was never theirs to begin with. So if this sounds like something that you are interested, get ready because this discussion is going to be amazing. So if there's a part of you right now that feels lost, I want you to pay attention to this conversation and think of it this way. Most of us were handed a GPS when we were about 15 years old, and the GPS had a route, and that route was already programmed in. It said things like get good grades, go to college, get the job, find the partner, buy the house, start the family. And the GPS was so specific, so confident, so culturally reinforced by every single rom-com and graduation speech and family dinner conversation that we never thought to question it. We just followed the GPS, turn by turn directions. And here's the thing about a GPS. It's great if you know where you want to go, but if someone else programmed the destination, then you can drive perfectly and still end up in the wrong city. What we actually needed was a compass. A compass doesn't tell you the route. It tells you your direction. And your direction comes from knowing yourself, your values, your desires, your actual identity. But nobody hands you a compass at 15. They hand you the GPS and they say, follow this and you'll be happy. I don't know about you, but I followed that GPS and I didn't land at happiness. I landed at a very different place. So let's talk about where this GPS actually comes from, because it doesn't just show up out of nowhere. There's an invisible curriculum that most women absorb, and it starts at 5 or 6 years old, and it teaches us 3 things. Lesson 1, your value is relational. You are worthy to the degree that you are in a relationship, that you're caring for someone or making someone else's life better. Think about how young girls are praised versus young boys. Girls hear, you're so helpful, you're so sweet, you're such a good friend. And boys hear, you're so smart, you're so strong, you're so fast. So from the very beginning, girls are praised for what they do for others, but boys are actually praised for what they are. In fact, did you know that parents are twice as likely to Google whether or not their boy is gifted than they are to Google whether or not their daughter is gifted? It is amazing. So here's the second lesson. There's a timeline, and whether you realize it or not, you're on it. By 25, you should be established. And by 28, you should be in a serious relationship. By 30, you should be married or at least close. And by 33, you better be thinking about kids. And if you're not, something is wrong. Not with your timeline, but with you. Can you imagine giving that same type of timeline to men and saying that their success depends on whether or not they have met that particular timeline, no one gives them a timeline. I mean, that alone could be defined as the massive difference. And here's lesson 3. Being agreeable is safer than being authentic. Don't make waves. Don't be too much. Be pleasant. Be easy. That sound familiar? I mean, we've covered this in episode 7 when we talked about the memo. Your value comes from being useful, from being easy. Well, that memo didn't start actually in your 20s. It started the day someone told you to be a good girl, right? Dana Crowley Jack wrote The Self-Silencing Theory, and Jack's research at Harvard found that women form their sense of self based on participation in close relationships. So when maintaining those close relationships requires suppressing their authentic voice, women develop what's called self-silencing. They censor their feelings, they put others' needs first, and judge themselves against external standards rather than internal ones. And the result of that is a divided self. The person you present to the world and the person you actually are inside. And that gap, that's where the feeling of being lost lives. Between the gap, in the gap of showing the world one version of you and then internally knowing that there is a completely different version that exists. Carol Gillian, in A Different Voice in 1982, said, women were not just omitted from public discourse. They had internalized the inequality and were silencing themselves. She identified the feminine voice as relational, dependent, and characterized by a moral obligation to maintain harmony, not because women are inherently that way, but because that's how they were conditioned. So you can see the connection here, right? I mean, the connection that exists between self-silencing and experiencing a gap. Because when you are silencing who you are, there is always going to be a gap between who you really are on the inside and how you show up for the world. So I experienced this myself. I mean, that is evidently clear by the previous episodes, but I want to talk about my personal experience in this gap. See, I started dating my ex-husband when I was 19 years old. 19. I mean, that is insane. I didn't know who I was yet. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I wanted my life to look like on my terms. But I did know this. I was supposed to be in a relationship. That was the next thing on the GPS. And so I followed it. And for the next almost 2 decades, I spent my entire life around someone else's expectations. I played small. I took a back seat. I told myself that maybe all of this lack of fulfillment, well, it was my fault. Maybe I was too ambitious. Maybe I was too big for my britches, which is exactly what women get told, by the way, when they start to outgrow the box that someone else has built for them, right? And here's the part that made me frankly the most sad is when I think about it. I spent probably 6 years shrinking myself, not because I wanted to, but because the GPS said that that's what you do when the marriage isn't working. You make yourself smaller, you accommodate, you silence yourself. And newsflash, it didn't make the marriage better. It didn't make me happier. And all it did was fuel the numbing, because the pain of not being yourself is so intense that you will do almost anything to not feel it. And if you're sitting here thinking that sounds familiar, I know because I see it every single day. When I was working on that borrowed map, the one that someone else gave me and led to a destination that I never second guessed, it cost me a lot, right? It cost me years of not pursuing who I really am. It cost me years of playing second fiddle in my own life. 6 years of playing small in a marriage that still didn't work, numbing because of the pain of inauthenticity. And that was frankly unbearable. Not knowing who I was outside of my relationship until I was in my early 40s, right? Frankly, I shouldn't have waited that long. I look back and I think, what would have been different if someone had told me at 25 that there's no timeline that I had to follow? that getting married wasn't the goal, that knowing myself was the goal, and that everything else, the right career, the right relationship, the right life, would have come so much faster had I just started there. Now, we've talked a little bit about the psychology of why this happens, but let's take it a little bit deeper because there are 3 concepts that explain why we get lost. The first is the self-silencing cycle, right? We talked about Dana Crowley-Jack's research, and she identified 4 components of self-silencing that create a vicious cycle. The first is externalized self-perception. You evaluate yourself through other people's eyes instead of your own. So, am I good enough becomes, do they think I'm good enough? The second is care as self-sacrifice. So you believe that being a good partner, friend, daughter, or employee means putting everyone else's needs above your own always. You can see the patterns here. The third is silencing the self. So you hold back what your real feelings are to avoid conflict. You don't say what you actually think because you're afraid of, frankly, what it will cost you. And then the fourth is the divided self, the gap between who you present to the world and who you actually are inside begins to get wider and wider until you don't even recognize yourself anymore. It's like having 2 closets. One is the closet that everyone sees. It's curated, organized, and presentable. And the other one, behind the closed door, is the real you, shoved in, back, wrinkled, all the things that you've forgotten and you don't want to look at anymore. And eventually, you forget what's even in that second closet. That's what self-silencing does. It doesn't just hide your voice. It makes you forget you ever even had one. Now, the second concept is identity foreclosure. Erik Erikson, the psychologist who gave us the term identity crisis, describes something called identity foreclosure. And it's when a person commits to an identity without ever actually exploring who they are. Whoa, does that land with me? They just adopt whatever identity was handed them by their parents, by culture, by the GPS, right? This is when you're told you are this, you are that, and then you begin to perform to that. And this is key. Identity foreclosure isn't about intelligence. Smart women foreclose on their identity all the time. In fact, high achieving women may be more likely to foreclose on their identity because they're so good at executing the plan that nobody, including them, ever stops to ask, is this the right plan? Now you can see why I've been so incredibly passionate about defining your destination in your business and realizing that creating your own GPS within your company is so critical. Otherwise, you're going to build a company and a business that doesn't reflect your own desires, but reflects what someone else told you was successful. Okay, see, Erikson's identity stages exist, and they say that there is an identity and then there is role confusion. And Erikson says this typically happens in adolescence, ages 12 to 18. But for many women, the exploration that's supposed to happen during that stage gets completely hijacked by this borrowed map, this borrowed GPS. They skip their own exploration entirely and go straight to commitment, to the relationship, to the career path, the life plan. The crisis doesn't hit until their late 20s and 30s when they finally have the space or the pain to ask, wait, is this even what I want? So again, this was supposed to be done from 12 to 18, but because we followed someone else's map, we never did it. So no wonder women are more likely to experience this type of gap, especially older in life. Okay, the third concept is the depersonalization of partnership. Research on identity in marriage found that the transition from I to we is associated with what researchers called depersonalization, a gradual erosion of private identity. And here's the part that's important. This isn't about having a bad partner at all. It happens even in healthy relationships because the culture around partnership pressures women to merge, to accommodate, to become a we at the cost of the I. And when you entered that relationship at a young age, like I did at 19, before the I was ever fully formed, the we didn't just influence our identity, it became our identity because there was nothing solid yet underneath it. It's why when my marriage collapsed at 42, I was saying to myself, who am I without this relationship? Right? I was lost. I think this can resonate with so many of you around your identity and maybe why there are parts of your life that feel unsteady and a little shaken at times. But the fact is, you can still do the work. You can still turn to the compass and you can still move from this diagnosis of, oh, there's a gap that exists to a possibility, right? I'm not giving you some sort of 5-step plan or anything like that. I'm just going to give you permission to begin to step into that possibility that exists. So here's where the part is that I tell you that I wish someone had told me all of this at 25. And it's really simple, just one phrase that I wish I knew then that I know now, and that is there is no timeline. Frankly, it doesn't matter what age you are at this moment. There is no timeline period that you have to live up to. You get to define the timeline. There's no age by which you need to be married. There is no deadline for figuring out who you are. There's no expiration date on becoming the version of yourself that you were actually meant to be. And the woman who sat across from me, the one who said she didn't do things because marriage was the goal, she also said something else. She said, your 20s should be all about you. Before too long, you'll be taking care of a family. And when you are on the back burner. You need to feel like yourself and know yourself when you're taking care of others and putting them first, because it's too hard to try to explore and figure out once you have kids. And frankly, she was right. But here's what I want to add to that. Even if you didn't use your 20s that way, even if you're 32 or 38 or 45 or almost 47 like me, and you're just now waking up to this, it is not too late. It's never too late to pick up the compass, right? So I want you to realize that when you're shifting from this borrowed map to your particular chosen direction, when you begin to use your own compass, there are a few questions that you can start to ask yourself. One is, what did I stop doing when I started living for someone else's expectations? This is going to reveal what you actually loved before this automated GPS took over. Again, what did I stop doing when I started living for someone else's expectations? Fascinating. If nobody was watching, judging, or keeping score, what would I do differently tomorrow? And this is going to reveal your actual values versus your performed ones. Again, if nobody was watching, judging, or keeping score, what would I do differently tomorrow? And the third question is, what am I tolerating right now that the real me would never accept? This reveals where your divided self is showing up in your daily life. It's going to show you what you've maybe pushed into that closet that you don't want to pay attention to, but really you need to open up the doors and see again. And I'll tell you what happened when I finally started asking these questions in my own life. The answers absolutely terrified me because they meant that the life I had built, the marriage, the career, the whole structure, wasn't the life I actually wanted. And that is a really, really scary thing to admit. But it was also the most honest I'd been with myself in years. And honestly, it was the beginning of every single thing that is good that has happened to me since. It all began with that question and realizing there is no timeline. I can be me anytime I decide to wake up, open those doors, and begin to pay attention to what I had stuffed away or silenced many years ago. So if you're sitting here today, you're smart, ambitious, successful by every external measure, and you feel lost, I want you to hear this. You are not broken. You are not ungrateful. You are not crazy for wanting more or different or something you can't even name yet. You're just waking up to the fact that the map you were following was never yours. And that's not a failure, that's the beginning. The GPS got you here, but the compass is going to get you home. And home isn't a place or a person or a title. Home is you. The version of you that you've been putting on the back burner, the one that's been waiting so patiently for you to finally turn around and say, okay, it's your turn. If this episode names something that you've been carrying around but couldn't quite put words to, screenshot it and share it to your stories and tag me. I would love to see what's resonating with you, because I promise there is a woman in your life who is living this right now and doesn't yet know that she's allowed to question the map. And if you want to go deeper, then DM me the word compass, and I've got something a little bit extra special for you. Okay, I will see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Sallie Ogden Show. I will see you next time.